A simple cleaning lady was invited to the gala of the most powerful man in town. The millionaire didn't expect to find something that money could never buy. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. The morning sun in New York still struggled to pierce the early mist when Isabella crossed the glass doors of Halcyon Holdings. Her hands, calloused from work, firmly gripped her worn bag while her eyes scanned the marble lobby that she knew better than any sacred territory. There, among those imposing columns and crystal chandeliers, she was as invisible as the air breathed by the powerful. 2 hours before the official workday began, Isabella was already in her silent ritual. The service elevator took her directly to the 16th floor, where the executive offices stretched like a labyrinth of power and ambition. Each door she passed contained secrets worth millions, decisions that changed the course of entire lives, chess games where pawns like her didn't even exist on the board. Her steps were calculated, almost ghostly. In nearly 2 years working, there Isabella had perfected the art of being necessary without being noticed. She knew exactly where to step so that the worn heel of her shoes wouldn't make noise on the gleaming floor. She knew each executive's schedule, their quirks, their moods. She knew that Mr. Anderson always left coffee spilled on his desk, that Director Carpenter had the neurotic habit of crumpling papers when nervous, that the Vice President liked his office to smell of French lavender. But there was one floor where she rarely went. The 23rd, his floor. Dominic Lancaster wasn't just another executive. His name was whispered through the corridors with a mixture of admiration and reverential fear. They said he had transformed a modest family, inheritance into a fortune that rivaled century-old dynasties. Others murmured darker stories about secret societies, auctions where forbidden experiences were purchased, territories where morality had negotiable prices. Isabella had never seen him personally. To her, Dominic Lancaster was an urban legend. A presence felt more than seen. Sometimes she passed by his empty office and noticed the lingering aroma of expensive cologne, masculine and disturbing. Other times, she found traces of his presence, a still warm coffee cup, financial newspapers folded with military precision, Parker pens left at perfect angles. That Thursday morning, while polishing the Persian sculpture that decorated the 16th floor lobby, Isabella allowed herself a moment of daydreaming. The piece was beautiful, a dancer immortalized in bronze and semi-precious stones, with movements so fluid they seemed to breathe. It was worth more than she would earn in 10 years of work, perhaps in an entire lifetime. That's when it happened. Her fingers, damp from the cleaning product, slipped. The sculpture wobbled, toppled, and Isabella watched in slow motion as her world crumbled along with that work of art. The sound of the impact echoed through the lobby like a gunshot, fragments of bronze and crystal scattering across the marble, in a mosaic of its own destruction. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella knelt instinctively, her hands trembling as she tried to collect the impossible-to-repair pieces. Tears threatened to sprout, but she contained them. Crying wouldn't solve anything. It never did. That's when she heard the footsteps. They weren't the hurried steps of a security guard or the nervous rush of curious employees. They were measured, deliberate steps that made the building itself seem to lean in to hear them. Isabella slowly raised her eyes, still kneeling on the floor, and her world stopped spinning. Dominic Lancaster was there, tall as she had imagined, but in a way that transcended mere physical measurements. He carried with him an authority that didn't need to be declared, a magnetism that made the air around him seem denser. His eyes, a stormy grey she had never seen in any human being, studied her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. He showed no anger, no irritation. In fact, he showed no emotion at all, and that was infinitely more terrifying than any explosion of fury. "Stand up," he said, and his voice was deep like distant thunder. Isabella obeyed, her legs wobbling, pieces of crystal still stuck to her hands. For an endless moment they stared at each other, she, a 24-year-old cleaner who had just destroyed a fortune, and he, a man whose power could erase her from the face of the earth with a simple gesture. But then, something impossible happened. Dominic Lancaster smiled, That smile had nothing comforting about it. It was dangerous, predatory, as if Dominic had just discovered a new toy and was deciding exactly how to break it. Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine, but couldn't look away from those grey eyes that seemed to read her every thought. "Do you know how much it cost?" he asked, casually gesturing to the remnants of the Persian sculpture. Isabella swallowed hard. "No, sir, but I can pay. Somehow I can—" $250,000. His voice cut through her words, like a sharp blade. 16th century work, unique in America. The number hit her like a punch to the stomach. 250,000. It was more than she would earn in 20 years, working day and night. It was impossible, unattainable, devastating. Her legs threatened to give way again. She began, but the words died in her throat. Dominic approached, his steps echoing in the sepulchral silence that had settled on the floor. Curious employees began to approach, attracted by the sound of the accident, but a simple look from him was enough to make them hastily retreat. No one wanted to be around when Dominic Lancaster was dealing with a problem. "What's your name?" he asked, stopping just a meter away. Up close, she could smell the cologne she sometimes found in his office, wood, spices, and something indefinable that made her heart race dangerously. "Isabella," she murmured. "Isabella Santos. Isabella Santos." He repeated her name as if tasting a rare wine, testing each syllable on his tongue. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 years, sir. And in all those 2 years, this is the first time we've met." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Interesting how some people manage to be invisible until the moment they no longer can be. There was something in the way he spoke that made Isabella feel as if she were being dissected, studied like a rare specimen. She kept her eyes lowered, trying to control her rapid breathing, but could feel the weight of his gaze on her like a physical presence. "Look at me." The command was soft, but carried an authority that wouldn't tolerate disobedience. Isabella slowly raised her eyes and again found herself lost in that stormy grey. For a moment that seemed eternal, they simply stared at each other, and she had the strange sensation that something fundamental had changed in the universe. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked, and there was something almost curious in his voice. Isabella thought about the answer. She was afraid, yes, but not in the way she had imagined she would be. It wasn't fear of losing her job or facing legal consequences. It was something more primitive, more visceral. It was the fear a gazelle feels when it realizes it's being watched by a predator, knowing its survival depends on not making sudden movements. "Should I be?" she responded, surprising herself with her own boldness. His smile widened, revealing perfect teeth and a dangerous gleam in his eyes. "Smart, I like that." He stepped back a few paces, hands in the pockets of a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. His posture was relaxed, but Isabella could sense the controlled tension in every muscle, like a feline ready to pounce. "Miss Santos, you've put me in an interesting position," he said, beginning to walk in circles around her. "On one hand, I have an employee who just destroyed an invaluable piece from my personal collection. On the other, I have—" He stopped directly in front of her. "Something that piques my curiosity." "I don't understand, sir." "Of course you don't. Not yet." He approached again, so close she could feel the heat emanating from his body. "But you will tonight." "Tonight?" Isabella repeated, confused. "There's a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel. The most influential names in the country will be there. Politicians, businessmen, people who move the world with a simple handshake." He paused, studying her expression. "You will accompany me." Isabella blinked several times, certain she had misunderstood. What? "It's not a request, Miss Santos. It's an opportunity, a chance to settle your debt in an alternative way." "But I don't understand. Why me? I'm just a cleaner." He completed for her, but there was no cruelty in his voice, just facts. "Who just cost me $250,000 and simultaneously awakened something in me that I haven't felt in a long time?" What exactly are you suggesting? Dominic leaned slightly, bringing his face closer to hers. I'm suggesting that you stop hiding in the shadows and come play with the big players. For one night, stop being invisible. The proposal was absurd, impossible. Isabella didn't have appropriate clothes, didn't know how to behave at high-level social events, didn't belong to that world of crystals and diamonds. But there was something in Dominic Lancaster's eyes that made her want to accept, even knowing it was a terrible idea. And if I refuse? Then you'll be fired, sued for damages, and I'll make sure you never get a job at any decent company in this city. His voice was casual, almost friendly, which made the threat even more terrifying. But you won't refuse. How can you be so sure? He smiled again, that dangerous smile that made her heart race. Because you're exactly as I thought you would be, too brave for your own good. The rest of the day passed like a confused blur for Isabella. After Dominic walked away, leaving only a business card with his personal number and the instruction, "I'll be waiting for your call until 5. She had tried to return to work as if nothing had happened, but her hands trembled as she held the cleaning cloth, and her mind couldn't concentrate on anything other than those grey eyes and the impossible proposal. A charity gala. At the Plaza Hotel. With him. It was madness. It was dangerous. It was everything she should refuse without thinking twice. But as the hours passed, Isabella found herself thinking not only about the threat of dismissal and lawsuit, but about something much more disturbing. The burning curiosity to know what it would be like to be by Dominic Lancaster's side, even if just for one night. At 4:55 in the afternoon, she dialed the number. "I knew you would call," was the first thing he said, without even a hello. His voice sounded amused, as if he had just won a bet with himself. "That doesn't mean I agree with whatever it is you're planning," Isabella responded, trying to sound firmer than she felt. "Of course not. You're just honoring a business agreement." There was irony in his voice, but also something she couldn't identify. "My driver will come to your house at 7. Wear what I'll send." "Wait, you don't even know where I live." But the call had already ended. 2 hours later, a black Bentley stopped in front of the small 3-story building where Isabella lived in Brooklyn. She watched from the window of her one-bedroom apartment, incredulous, as a man in an impeccable suit got out of the car carrying an elegant box and a garment bag. The doorbell rang, and Isabella opened the door with her heart in her throat. The man, who introduced himself only as Michael at Mr. Lancaster's service, delivered everything with a respectful nod and withdrew without an additional word. Alone in her modest apartment, Isabella stood for several minutes just looking at the items that had just arrived. The box was from a store she knew only by name, a jeweler famous in the society pages of newspapers. The garment bag bore the mark of a French boutique she would never even have dared to enter. With trembling hands, she opened the garment bag. First, the dress she found inside took her breath away. It was pure silk in a navy blue shade so dark it almost looked black, cut to accentuate curves she didn't even know she possessed. The fabric was as soft as water between her fingers, and she could feel the quality in every fiber. In the jewelry box, she found discreet sapphire earrings, a delicate necklace that perfectly complemented the dress, and a ring that seemed to have been chosen specifically for her finger. How did he know her size? How did he know anything about her? There was also a handwritten card on embossed paper. The handwriting was masculine, precise, almost aggressive. Some gems only reveal their true beauty when they find the right setting. Until later, Isabella sat on the edge of her bed, still holding the card. Part of her wanted to run, return everything, pretend none of this had happened. But a larger part, a part she didn't recognize in herself, was curious to see where this night would lead her. As she got ready, she looked at herself in the small foggy mirror of her bathroom. The dress transformed her completely. She was no longer the invisible cleaner from Halcyon Holdings. She was a woman who could belong to that world, at least superficially. But as she applied the simple makeup she owned, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that she was dressing for her own sacrifice. On the other side of the city, Dominic Lancaster was in his apartment on the top floor of a luxury building in Central Park West, looking through the panoramic window that offered a spectacular view of New York. He had a glass of Scottish whiskey in his hand but hadn't taken even a sip. His mind was too busy trying to understand what had happened that morning. He had dealt with thousands of employees over the years. He had fired people for lesser offenses, had destroyed careers on a whim, had used his power to bend stronger wills than that of a simple cleaner. But something about Isabella Santos had affected him in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the way she had raised her chin when he asked if she should be afraid. Perhaps it was the raw honesty in her eyes, a purity he had forgotten existed. Or perhaps it was simply the fact that, for the first time in years, someone had managed to surprise him. Dominic knew he was playing with fire. He knew himself too well to ignore the signs. The obsession had already begun. That primitive need to possess, to control, to corrupt. It was a pattern he knew well, a destructive cycle that had ruined previous relationships. But Isabella was different. There was something about her that made him want to be different too. At least that's what he was trying to believe as he adjusted his tuxedo and prepared for a night that he knew would change everything. The phone rang. It was Michael informing him that he had picked up Miss Santos and they were on their way to the hotel. Dominic closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. There was no turning back now. The piece was in motion, and he still wasn't sure if he was the player or just another pawn on the board of destiny. The Plaza Hotel rose before Isabella like a palace of dreams and nightmares. The golden lights emanating from its windows created an almost magical glow against the dark sky of New York, where the gala had been moved at the last minute. The Bentley glided smoothly through the main entrance, passing other luxury cars that formed a procession of wealth and power. Isabella took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that threatened to overwhelm her. During the entire journey, another shock that Dominic had arranged without warning, she had tried to mentally prepare for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the magnitude of what awaited her. "We have arrived, miss," announced Michael, the driver, with the same respectful courtesy he had shown throughout the day. When she got out of the car, her legs trembled slightly in the high heels she wasn't yet accustomed to wearing. The entrance of the hotel was full of photographers, reporters and onlookers who crowded to see the arrivals. Flashes fired constantly, creating a surreal atmosphere of fame and spectacle. That's when she saw him. Dominic Lancaster was standing at the top of the marble staircase, impeccable in a tuxedo that seemed to have been cut specifically for his body. Even from a distance, she could feel the intensity of his gaze upon her. He didn't smile, didn't gesture, simply observed her like a predator studying its prey. As Isabella climbed the steps, the murmur of the crowd around began to grow. She could feel the looks, the whispers, the morbid curiosity of people trying to identify who was this unknown woman who had arrived in such a dramatic way. "Who is she?" She heard fragments of conversations. "Never seen her before. Must be someone important if she's with Lancaster." When she finally reached the top of the staircase, Dominic approached with measured steps. Without a word, he extended his arm to her, a gesture both gallant and possessive. Isabella hesitated for a fraction of a second before accepting, and the touch of his hand through the fabric of his tuxedo sent an electric current through her entire body. "You look stunning," he murmured close to her ear, his deep voice sending chills down her spine. "Exactly as I imagined." They entered the main hall, and Isabella had to make a conscious effort not to let her jaw drop. The environment was grander than anything she could have imagined. Crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling created prisms of light that danced across the golden walls. Elegantly arranged tables spread throughout the hall, decorated with floral arrangements that cost more than her monthly salary. But it was the people who really impressed. Isabella recognized faces from the society pages, politicians she saw on television, businessmen whose names appeared in the financial papers. It was like being inside a high society magazine, where each person present had the power to change the world with a single decision. "Nervous?" Dominic asked, noticing how she observed everything with wide eyes. "Terrified would be a more accurate word," she admitted honestly. He laughed, a low and genuine sound that surprised her. "Good. Fear keeps you alert, and tonight you'll need all the attention possible." Before she could ask what he meant by that, they were interrupted by a woman who approached with the deadly grace of a serpent. She was stunning in a calculated way, with platinum blonde hair in a sophisticated bun, wearing a red dress that cost more than an apartment. Her blue eyes were as cold as polar ice. "Dominic, darling," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "What a surprise to see you here, and with interesting company." Isabella immediately felt the hostility radiating from the woman, though it was disguised by a mask of perfect social etiquette. Dominic, in turn, became visibly tense, his muscles contracting under the tuxedo. "Evelyn," he responded, his voice neutral but laden with warning. "As always, punctual in your dramatic appearances." Evelyn smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "And you, as always, full of surprises. Won't you introduce me to your companion?" There was something venomous in the way she pronounced the word companion, as if it were a disguised insult. Isabella felt a wave of discomfort, but maintained her composure, remembering that she was representing not just herself, but somehow Dominic as well. "Isabella Santos," Dominic said, placing his hand on her back in a protective gesture. "Isabella, this is Evelyn Montgomery." "It's a pleasure," Isabella said, extending her hand politely. Evelyn greeted her with a grip that was too firm, her eyes scanning Isabella from head to toe in a calculated assessment. "The pleasure is mine. I must say, Dominic, you have eclectic taste in your choices." The tension in the air was palpable. Isabella could sense that there was much more happening between Dominic and Evelyn than was apparent on the surface. Shared history, secrets, perhaps even wounds that had never completely healed. "If you'll excuse us," Dominic said, his voice cutting. "We have people to greet." But before they could move away, Evelyn lightly touched Isabella's arm. "Darling, may I give you some advice? Dominic has complicated tendencies. I hope you know what you're getting into." The warning was disguised as friendly concern, but Isabella could perceive the underlying threat. She looked directly into Evelyn's eyes, finding there a coldness that made her immediately understand that she had just made an enemy. "Thank you for your concern," Isabella responded with more firmness than she felt. "But I'm sure I can take care of myself." Evelyn smiled again, that predatory smile that promised nothing good. "Of course you can, we all think that at the beginning." When she walked away, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and veiled threats, Dominic guided Isabella to the opposite side of the hall. She could feel the tension in his movements, the controlled anger that emanated from him like heat. "Who is she exactly?" Isabella asked when they were far enough away not to be overheard. Dominic stopped and turned to her, his grey eyes darker than a storm. "Someone who should have stayed in the past." The rest of the night passed like a whirlwind of introductions, conversations laden with subtext, and dances that seemed more like human chess games. Isabella discovered she had a natural talent for observing and absorbing, a skill she had developed during years of being invisible. Now, however, she was no longer observing from outside. She was at the center of the game. Dominic led her through the hall as if she were a work of art he wanted to display, but also protect. His hand remained constantly on her back, a possessive touch that sent waves of heat through the silk fabric of her dress. He introduced her simply as Isabella, without title or explanation, leaving people to draw their own conclusions. And they did. Isabella could see it in the curious looks, the calculated smiles, the seemingly innocent questions that tried to extract information about who she was and where she had come from. For those people, she was a mystery that needed to be deciphered, a new piece on the board that could change the balance of power. During a slow waltz, as Dominic guided her across the dance floor with a natural grace that revealed years of training, he leaned in to whisper in her ear, "You're doing better than I expected." "What exactly did you expect?" she asked, allowing herself to relax slightly in his arms. The proximity was intoxicating. She could feel every muscle of his chest through the thin fabric of his tuxedo, the warmth of his skin, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. "That you'd flee before the first hour," he admitted with a low laugh. "That you'd realize this world is no place for angels." "Who said I'm an angel?" The question caught him by surprise. His grey eyes studied her with new intensity, as if seeing her for the first time. "Interesting. And what would you be then, Miss Santos?" "Just a woman trying to understand the rules of a game she never knew existed." The music ended, but they remained standing in the center of the floor, lost in each other's gaze. It was Evelyn who broke the moment, appearing beside them with another man, older, distinguished, with the kind of authority that came only from decades of real power. "Dominic, you must meet Senator Collins," she said with that venomous smile. "He was most curious to meet your new protégé." The senator greeted Dominic with the familiarity of old acquaintances, but his eyes lingered on Isabella with an interest that made her feel uncomfortable. "So this is the young lady who has been causing such a stir tonight. I must say, my dear Dominic, you always had good taste for untapped talent." There was something in the way he said untapped talent that made Isabella's stomach turn. She realized she was being evaluated like a commodity, weighed and measured by men who saw people as tradable assets. "The senator is known for his private auctions," Evelyn continued, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Very exclusive events where unique experiences are shared among gentlemen of refined taste." The implication was clear and nauseating. Isabella felt Dominic tense beside her, his hand lightly tightening around her waist in a protective gesture. "I'm afraid Miss Santos is not available for that kind of entertainment," Dominic said, his voice cutting like ice. The senator laughed, an unpleasant sound that made Isabella shiver. Of course, I perfectly understand. When we find something truly special, it's natural to want to keep it just for ourselves. But remember, my friend, everything has a price. Everything." The conversation was interrupted when a waiter discreetly approached, whispering something in Dominic's ear. His expression immediately hardened. "If you'll excuse us," he said abruptly, taking Isabella by the hand. "There are matters that require my immediate attention." They moved away quickly, but not before Isabella saw the triumphant smile on Evelyn's face. There was something there she wasn't understanding, some game being played between the lines that was beyond her comprehension. Dominic led her through elegant corridors until they reached a private suite that had clearly been reserved for him. The environment was luxurious but intimate, with a view of Central Park illuminated by the city lights. As soon as the door closed, Dominic's controlled mask finally fell. "Damn it," he muttered, running his hands through his hair. "I shouldn't have brought you here. I shouldn't have exposed you to them." "Exposed to what exactly?" Isabella asked, but part of her already feared the answer. Dominic turned to her, and for the first time since they met, she saw real vulnerability in his eyes. "To me, to what I am, to the world I come from. Isabella, there are things about my life, about how I built my fortune, that you don't understand." "Then explain it to me." He laughed bitterly. "You want to know the truth?" "The truth is that not all my money comes from legitimate investments. There are clubs, private circles where men like Senator Collins pay fortunes for experiences, young, innocent women who are introduced to a world that devours their purity as if it were a rare delicacy." Isabella's blood ran cold. "And you participate in this." "Participated," he corrected, but the distinction sounded weak even to him. "Before you. Before looking into your eyes and realizing that I had forgotten that true innocence still existed in this world." Isabella moved away from him, her legs trembling. Everything was starting to make sense. The sudden interest, the invitation to the gala, the way the senator had looked at her. "So that's it? I'm what, your next project?" "No," Dominic said vehemently, approaching her. "You're the opposite of that. You're the first person in years who makes me want to be different. How can I believe you? How can I trust someone who does that kind of thing?" Dominic stopped in front of her, his hands trembling slightly. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm more terrified of losing something than of not being able to possess it." The silence stretched between them, laden with tension and unspoken truths. Isabella could see the internal war in his eyes, the battle between the man he had been and the man he perhaps wanted to become. "How long?" she asked quietly. Has it been since you've been with someone who chose to be with you of their own free will? The question hit him like a punch. I don't remember, he admitted. Maybe never. And how many women like me have you corrupted? Dominic closed his eyes as if the question were a blade cutting his soul. Many. Too many. Isabella nodded, slowly processing the confession. At least you're honest. Honesty is the least I can offer you, especially because— He hesitated, as if the next words were being torn forcibly from his throat. Because you're a virgin, aren't you? The question caught her completely off guard. How did you— It's in your eyes, in the way you move, how you react to touch. It's an innocence that can't be faked. He approached again, his voice low and intense. And it terrifies me, Isabella. Because part of me wants to protect you, and another part wants to be the only man to teach you what your body can feel. Dominic's words hung in the air like both a confession and a threat. Isabella could feel her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. The proximity between them was magnetic and dangerous, like standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one false step would be fatal. Are you trying to scare me? She asked, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. I'm trying to be honest with you about who I am, about what I'm capable of doing. Dominic took another step closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I want you to know exactly what you're getting into before you make any decision. And what decision would that be? Whether you'll run from me now, while you still can. His fingers lightly brushed her face, a touch so soft it could have been just imagination, or whether you'll stay and discover how far this path can take us. Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened in that impossible night. A few hours ago, she was just an invisible cleaner. Now she was in a luxurious suite at the Plaza Hotel, wearing clothes that cost more than her annual salary, being courted by a man who had just confessed to having a dark past involving the corruption of innocent women. She should run. Any sensible person would run. Why me? She asked, opening her eyes to meet his. With all the money and power you have, you could have any woman. Why choose someone like me? Because any woman isn't you. The answer came without hesitation, as if he had already asked himself the same question 1,000 times. Because when you look at me, you don't see my bank account or my social status. You see just a man, and it's been years since anyone has looked at me like that. Maybe because you don't let anyone get close enough to really see you. Dominic smiled, but there was sadness in that smile. Smart, dangerously smart. He stepped back slightly, as if he needed space to think. Isabella, I need you to understand something. I'm not a good man. I've done things, made decisions that haunt me every night. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, used my power in ways I can never undo. But when I'm with you, I can imagine a version of myself that might be worthy of redemption. The confession hit her like a wave, laden with a vulnerability she hadn't expected to find in this seemingly invincible man. Isabella approached him this time, her hands trembling slightly when they touched his chest through the tuxedo. Dominic, she said softly, everyone deserves a chance to change. But change has to come from within. It can't be for someone else. And if I say you make me want to try? Before she could respond, Dominic's phone rang. He ignored it on the first call, but when it rang again immediately, his expression hardened. I need to take this. The conversation was brief, and in code she didn't understand, but she could see the tension growing on his face with each word. When he hung up, there was a storm in his eyes. What is it? Isabella asked. Problems. Someone is messing with my business, trying to expose aspects of my past that I'd prefer to keep buried. He began to pace back and forth, clearly disturbed. Confidential documents are being leaked. Old contracts are appearing where they shouldn't. It's as if someone is trying to systematically destroy me. Do you have any idea who could be doing this? Dominic stopped and looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. For a terrible moment, she saw suspicion in his eyes. Until this morning I would have said no, but now what? The realization hit her like a slap. You think it's me? That all this was planned? The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. You really believe I would be capable of setting up this whole situation? That I would break a sculpture on purpose to get close to you? I don't know what to believe anymore, Dominic admitted, running his hands through his hair. Too many coincidences, Isabella. You appear out of nowhere, destroy something valuable just when I need a distraction, and now my enemies are moving. How can I be sure you're not involved? The pain she felt was more intense than any physical injury, because I'm here opening up to you, allowing myself to feel things I've never felt before, because I could have run 100 times tonight and I chose to stay. But what if that's exactly what your employers want? For me to fall in love with, you to lower my guard? The word love hung in the air between them like a bomb about to explode. Dominic realized what he had said at the same moment she did, and the expression on his face became even more tortured. So that's it? Isabella asked, her voice breaking slightly. You're falling in love with me, but you don't trust me? I don't know who to trust anymore, not when so much is at stake. Isabella nodded slowly, feeling something break inside her chest. I understand. You've spent so much time in a world where everything and everyone has a price that you can't recognize. Something genuine when it's right in front of you. She headed for the door, but he reached her before she could leave. Isabella, wait. For what? For you to continue treating me like I'm a criminal? For you to continue doubting every word I say, every feeling I show? Tears threatened to fall, but she contained them with willpower. I may be inexperienced in this world, Dominic, but I'm not stupid. I know when I'm not welcome. You don't understand. If I'm wrong about you, if you really are innocent in all this, then I'm putting you in danger just by being with you. There are people who wouldn't hesitate to hurt you to get to me. And if you're right, if I really am a spy or whatever you're imagining— Dominic held her by the shoulders, his grey eyes burning with intensity. Then I'll discover the truth. And when I do, you'll wish you had never crossed my path. The threat was clear, but there was something more in his voice. Pain, fear, the terrible possibility that the only person who had managed to awaken real feelings in him might be just another illusion in a world made of lies. Isabella freed herself from his hands. Well, then you have your answer. Someone who can threaten a person they claim to be falling in love with is not someone I should trust. She left the suite without looking back, leaving Dominic alone with his suspicions and regrets, but not before hearing one last thing he muttered. To the void. For God's sake, let me be wrong. 3 weeks had passed since the night at the Plaza Hotel, and Isabella Santos was no longer the same woman who had broken a Persian sculpture on the 16th floor of Halcyon Holdings. She had returned to work the following Monday as if nothing had happened, but something fundamental had changed in her essence. Dominic hadn't tried to contact her. He hadn't even appeared at the company since that night. According to rumors circulating through the corridors, he was dealing with a business crisis that threatened his fortune and reputation. Compromising documents continued to leak, federal investigations had been opened, and shares of his rivals on the stock market soared while his plummeted. Isabella should have felt relieved to be free of that dangerous world and its complications. She should have returned to her simple and invisible life, grateful to have escaped before it was too late. But she couldn't stop thinking about him, about the last moments they spent together, the pain she saw in his eyes when he accused her, the way his voice broke when he murmured, "Let me be wrong." It was this obsession that led her to do something she never imagined herself capable of doing: investigate. She started small, using her access to cleaning areas to observe things she previously ignored. Documents left on desks, phone conversations she overheard by chance, emails open on computers she should be cleaning. Slowly she began to piece together a puzzle that revealed a much more complex conspiracy than she had imagined. Evelyn Montgomery's name appeared in several of the leaked documents, not as the author, but as the silent beneficiary of various transactions that were now being questioned. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Isabella had developed a keen eye for details during years of invisibility. One Thursday night, after everyone had left, she used her cleaning access to enter the office of one of the directors who had been involved in the suspicious conversations. What she found took her breath away. Printed emails detailing a plan to systematically bring down Dominic Lancaster, using information that only someone very close to him could have. And the signature on the emails was unmistakable. E.M. Isabella. Photographed everything with her old cell phone. Her hands trembling not from fear but from anger. Dominic had doubted her, had accused her of betrayal, when the real traitor had been right in front of him all along. But before she could decide what to do with this information, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Quickly, she put everything back in place and left the office, returning to her cleaning materials. When security passed for the night round, she was scrubbing the floor as she always did. On the other side of the city, Dominic was in his apartment, surrounded by lawyers and strategists trying to find a way to save his crumbling empire. Each day brought new accusations, new leaks, new evidence of questionable practices in his past. He knew many of the accusations were true. He had indeed participated in shadowy circles, had made morally dubious decisions. But some of the evidence was fabricated, distorted, and this intrigued him. "Mr. Lancaster," said Marcus, his lead attorney, "we need to consider a settlement. The evidence is substantial." "No," Dominic responded dryly, pouring himself another glass of whiskey. "Whoever is doing this has made a mistake, and when I discover what it was, I'm going to destroy them." But even as he spoke confidently, his mind kept returning to Isabella, to the pain in her eyes when he accused her, to the dignity with which she had walked out of his life. He had hired investigators to discreetly watch her, not because he still suspected her, but because he feared his enemies might try to use her against him. The reports were always the same. She worked, went home, lived a normal and simple life. There were no secret meetings, no suspicious contacts. She was exactly who she had always seemed to be, an innocent woman who had become involved in something much bigger than herself by pure chance. And he had thrown it all away due to paranoia and fear. It was Marcus who brought the news that changed everything. "Dominic, there's something you need to see. Our investigators found something interesting about Evelyn Montgomery." The name made Dominic's blood freeze. "What about her?" "She's secretly funding several of the investigations against you. She's also behind at least 3 of the most damaging leaks. We have evidence that she's been planning this for months." The revelation hit him like a punch. Evelyn, the woman he had been involved with years ago, who had never accepted the end of the relationship, who always appeared at the most inconvenient moments. He should have suspected her from the beginning. "There's more," Marcus continued. "She has been seen several times in the area where Miss Santos lives. Our investigators believe she may be planning something against her." The whiskey glass slipped from Dominic's hands, shattering on the floor. "What?" "Apparently Evelyn sees Miss Santos as a threat. Even after you two separated, she remains obsessed with the idea that there's something between you." Dominic was already grabbing his car keys before Marcus even finished speaking. "Send security to Isabella's address, now, and find Evelyn." As he drove through the night streets of New York, Dominic hated himself for every moment he had wasted doubting the only person who had been genuine with him. Isabella was in danger because of him, and he hadn't even tried to protect her adequately. When he arrived at her building, he saw that everything was dark. The doorman informed him that she had left earlier that night and had not yet returned. Dominic felt panic beginning to set in. His phone rang, unknown number. "Hello?" "Dominic, darling." Evelyn's voice was as sweet as always, but there was an underlying madness that he had never noticed before. "Are you looking for something? Or would that be someone?" "Evelyn, if you've touched a hair on her head." "Oh, relax. She's perfectly safe, for now. But we need to talk, you and I, about how you replaced me with some common employee, about how you so quickly forgot everything we shared. What do you want?" "Justice, and maybe a little revenge. You have 1 hour to come to the old warehouse, in the Harbor District, the same place where we used to have our special meetings. Come alone or your little virgin will discover exactly how creative we can be with innocent women." The line went dead, leaving Dominic alone with his terror and regret. He had failed Isabella in every possible way, first by doubting her, then by failing to protect her. but there was still time to do the right thing, even if it cost him his life. The abandoned warehouse in the harbor district of New York was a mausoleum of rust and dark memories. Dominic knew every corner of that place. It had been the scene of some of his most dangerous encounters in the years when he flirted with the darker aspects of power and pleasure. Now, as he parked his car in front of the corroded doors, he wondered if he wasn't walking directly into his own destruction. The full moon cast ghostly shadows through the broken windows of the building, creating a labyrinth of light and darkness that seemed straight out of a nightmare. Dominic checked the gun he carried in the inner holster of his jacket, a precaution he had learned to take years ago when he discovered that money and power also attracted deadly enemies. "Evelyn!" His voice echoed through the empty space as he entered. "I'm here. Let Isabella go." The laugh that answered came from somewhere in the shadows, melodious and disturbed. "Always so direct, my dear. It's one of the things I most love and hate about you." Evelyn emerged from the darkness like an apparition, wearing a black outfit that made her look like an elegant widow. But her eyes shone with a light that wasn't entirely sane, and her hands held a small but lethal pistol. "Where is she?" Dominic asked, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline running through his veins. "Safe, for now." Evelyn circled around him like a predator studying its prey. "You know, I planned all this for months. Each leak, each scandal, each accusation. It was almost artistic in its precision." "Why, Evelyn? What did I do to deserve this?" She stopped, in front of him, her eyes burning with an unhealthy passion. "You replaced me, discarded me as if I were one of your occasional whores. And for whom? For an insignificant cleaner who doesn't even know how to use the power you placed in her hands. Isabella has nothing to do with this. She's innocent." "Innocent?" Evelyn laughed again, the sound echoing off the walls like broken glass. "Oh, Dominic, you were always so intelligent for business and so stupid for women. Your little virgin isn't as innocent as she seems." Before Dominic could ask what she meant, a new voice cut through the darkness. "She's right about one thing, I'm not the same woman you met." Isabella stepped out of the shadows, but not as the defenseless victim Dominic expected to find. There was something different in her posture, a confidence that wasn't there before. "In you," her hands, she held a phone that was clearly recording the conversation. "Isabella," Dominic breathed, relieved to see her alive but confused by her apparent freedom. "Surprised?" Evelyn smiled, but there was a new tension in her voice. "Your girlfriend has some tricks of her own. She discovered our little meeting and insisted on participating. Apparently she has some things to say to you." Isabella kept her eyes fixed on Dominic, and he could see a mixture of pain and determination in her gaze. 3 weeks, Dominic. 3 weeks since you accused me of betrayal and expelled me from your life. Want to know what I did in that time?" He couldn't answer, fascinated by the transformation in her. "I investigated. I found out who was really trying to destroy you. I collected evidence, documents, recordings." She raised the phone. "I have everything you need to clear your name and put Evelyn in jail where she belongs." Evelyn growled softly, pointing the gun alternately at Dominic and Isabella. "Clever little bitch, but it doesn't matter what you discovered. Neither of you will leave here alive to tell about it." "Actually," Isabella said calmly, "I already have. The evidence is with the FBI. They should be here in—" She checked her watch. "About 5 minutes." The revelation hit Evelyn like a slap. Her mask of control finally fell, revealing the complete madness that had hidden behind her beauty and sophistication. "You couldn't have done that. You're not smart enough." "You made a mistake, Evelyn," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength. "You underestimated the insignificant woman. I may be invisible in your world, but that gave me access to places and information no one else had. For 2 years, I observed, learned, absorbed. And when you started your campaign against Dominic, I was paying attention." Dominic looked at the woman before him and realized he didn't truly know her. The Isabella he had met that morning was real, but she was just one facet of someone much more complex and strong than he had imagined. "You fell in love with an illusion," Isabella said, addressing him for the first time since she appeared. with the idea of an innocent virgin you could mold and control, but I was never that. I was just a woman trying to survive in a world that saw me as disposable. Isabella, Dominic began, but she raised her hand to silence him. No. Now it's my turn to speak. Her eyes burned with an intensity that rivaled his own. You accused me of betrayal at the first difficulty. You didn't trust me, didn't believe in me, and yet here I am, saving your life and your reputation. Evelyn, realizing she was losing control of the situation, became desperate. Enough! Enough of all this talk. She pointed the gun directly at Isabella. If I can't have you, Dominic, at least I can make sure she doesn't either. Time seemed to slow down. Dominic saw Evelyn's finger contracting on the trigger and moved instinctively, throwing himself in front of Isabella at the exact moment the shot echoed through the warehouse. The E. Pain was immediate and intense, radiating from his left shoulder. He fell to the floor, blood streaming down his ruined tuxedo, but his eyes remained fixed on Isabella, checking if she was all right. Dominic! Isabella knelt beside him, her hands pressing on the wound to stop the bleeding. For a moment, her composure disappeared, replaced by the terror of losing him. Evelyn stood still, looking at the gun in her hands, as if she couldn't believe what she had done. I didn't mean to. It was supposed to be her. But it wasn't, Dominic said with difficulty, his voice weak but determined. And now you'll pay for everything you've done. The sound of sirens began to approach, growing in intensity. Evelyn looked around desperately, realizing there was no escape. Her options had run out. Her revenge had turned against her. This isn't over, she whispered, but her voice sounded more like a frightened child than a dangerous woman. You can't just... I loved you, Dominic. I really loved you. That wasn't. Love, Isabella said softly, still pressing on Dominic's wound. It was obsession, and obsession always destroys everything it touches. The red and blue lights of police cars began to invade the warehouse through the broken windows. Evelyn looked one last time at Dominic and Isabella, her expression a mixture of hatred, sadness, and regret. When the police finally entered, they found 3 people whose lives had been permanently altered by a night of truths, lies, and the discovery that true love sometimes comes disguised in the most unexpected ways. Mount Sinai Hospital had never seemed so quiet as in that early morning. Isabella was sitting in the chair next to Dominic's bed, watching the slight rise and fall of his chest as he slept under the effect of painkillers. The bullet had been successfully removed, but the doctors said he would need several weeks to recover completely. 3 days had passed since the night at the warehouse, 3 days during which the world of both had completely changed. Evelyn was in jail, facing charges of attempted murder, extortion, and corporate sabotage. The evidence Isabella had meticulously collected proved to be sufficient not only to exonerate Dominic, but to expose the entire network of corruption that Evelyn had built over the years. Dominic's lawyers worked day and night to restore his reputation and reverse the damage to his companies. Halcyon Holdings shares were already beginning to recover as the truth came to light, and several of his rivals who had taken advantage of the situation now faced their own investigations. But for Isabella, none of this mattered as much as the unconscious man in the bed before her. Dominic began to stir, his eyelids fluttering before slowly opening. His grey eyes, though clouded by medication, immediately searched for her. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Where else would I be?" Isabella responded softly, leaning closer. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been hit by a truck, but alive." He tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "Isabella, we need to talk." "You need to rest." "No, I need to speak." Dominic struggled to position himself better in bed, his eyes never leaving her face. "I need to ask for your forgiveness, for everything." Isabella felt tears threatening to sprout, but she contained them. "Dominic, let me speak, please." His voice was intense despite the weakness. "I was a coward. When my world began to crumble, the first thing I did was suspect the only person who had been genuine with me. You offered me something I hadn't received in years, love without conditions, without a hidden agenda. and I threw it all away out of fear. You were protecting yourself. I understand that. No, you don't understand. Dominic extended his good hand, lightly touching her face. I wasn't protecting myself. I was sabotaging us both because I couldn't believe I deserved something real. I spent so much time in relationships based on power and manipulation that I forgot what it was like to be with someone who wanted me for who I really am. Isabella held his hand against her face. And what are you really, Dominic? A man who has made terrible mistakes, who participated in dark games and hurt innocent people, who built an empire on morally questionable foundations. He paused, gathering courage to continue, but also a man who fell hopelessly in love with a woman who made me want to be better. Fell in love? Isabella repeated softly. Completely, irrevocably. From the moment you raised your eyes from that marble floor and looked at me without fear. Dominic smiled weakly. You terrify me, Isabella Santos, because you have the power to destroy me in ways that no enemy has ever managed. Isabella leaned in and gently kissed his forehead. And you terrify me too, because you made me discover that I'm much stronger than I imagined, that I can fight for what I believe in, that I deserve to be loved for who I really am, not for who someone wants me to be. Who you really are, Dominic said, studying her face, is the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. Intelligent, brave, determined, you saved me, Isabella, in every possible way. We saved each other. They remained silent for a moment, just absorbing each other's presence. Finally, Dominic broke the silence. There's something I need to know. What do you intend to do now? Return to your old life? Pretend none of this happened? Isabella smiled, and there was something new in her smile, a confidence that wasn't there before. Actually, I have some plans. Marcus, your lawyer, offered me a job. Apparently, my investigative ability and attention to detail impressed some important clients. You're going to leave Halcyon Holdings. I already did. I handed in my resignation yesterday. She leaned back in the chair, observing the surprised expression on his face. I can't be invisible anymore, Dominic. You showed me that I have value, that I can be more than just a shadow in the corridors. I won't waste that discovery. Dominic nodded slowly, pride shining in his eyes. And us? Is there any possibility for us too? That depends. On what? On you being truly willing to change, not for me, but for yourself. Isabella leaned forward, her voice firm. I don't want to be your redemption, Dominic. I don't want to be the pure woman who cleanses your sins. I want to be your partner, your equal, someone with whom you can build something genuine. And if I say that's exactly what I want too, then we'll have to discover together if we can build a relationship based on truth, not on fantasies or idealizations. Dominic laughed, despite the pain in his shoulder. You know I fell in love with the wrong woman, don't you? With the shy and submissive cleaner I thought you were. Now I discover I'm hopelessly in love with a brilliant and independent private investigator. Lucky for you, I'm still the same person. I'm just using more of my potential now. The best luck of my life. A nurse entered to check Dominic's vital signs, interrupting the moment. When she left, Isabella stood up to leave. Where are you going? Dominic asked. Home. You need to rest and I have work to do. Your companies won't restructure themselves. Your companies? Isabella stopped at the door and turned, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. Oh, didn't I mention? Marcus offered me not just a job, but a stake in some of his consulting operations. Apparently, talent for uncovering secrets is highly valued in the corporate world. Dominic watched her leave, a mixture of admiration and desire burning in his chest. The woman who had just left his room was no longer the vulnerable cleaner he had met. She was a force of nature, a partner worthy of the love he felt for her. And for the first time in years, Dominic Lancaster found himself looking forward to the future rather than being haunted by the past. 6 months later, New York dawned with a golden sun that painted the skyscrapers with promises of a special day. Isabella was in her new office, on the 25th floor of a commercial building in Midtown, reviewing the final documents of an investigation she had conducted for an international client. Her corporate security consulting firm had grown beyond her most optimistic expectations, and she now commanded a team of 10 specialized investigators. The suit she wore was elegant but practical, cut for a woman who knew exactly who she was and where she wanted to go. Her hair, now cut in a more sophisticated style, framed a face that had gained a confidence that radiated from within. A year ago, she was invisible. Today, her name appeared in specialized magazine articles as one of the country's most promising young professionals. The intercom rang. "Miss Santos, Mr. Lancaster is here to see you." Isabella smiled. "You can send him in." Dominic entered her office, and she felt the same thrill as always upon seeing him. He had kept his promise of change. In recent months, he had completely moved away from the dark circles of his past, restructured his companies with rigorous ethical practices, and become a vocal advocate for corporate transparency. The process hadn't been easy. He had lost some lucrative business and made enemies among former colleagues, but he had gained something much more valuable, his soul back. "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit," he said, approaching her desk with that smile that still made her heart race. "Depends. Is it professional or personal?" "A bit of both." Dominic sat in the chair in front of her desk, and Isabella noticed he was slightly nervous. "First, the professional. I'd like to hire you for a job." "What kind of job?" "Background investigation. There's a specific person I need to know. Better before making an important proposal." Isabella raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And who would that be?" "Isabella Santos. 25 years old, native of New York, former cleaning staff who became one of the most respected investigators in the city. They say she's brilliant, independent, and has a tendency to save lost men." Isabella pretended to seriously consider. "This investigation might be complicated. This Isabella Santos has a reputation for being very demanding in matters of character and integrity." "Good, because the man who's interested in her has spent the last 6 months proving he can be worthy of her." They looked at each other for a moment, the air charged with the sexual and emotional tension that had always existed between them, but now tempered with something deeper: mutual respect, genuine trust, and a love that had survived all storms. "And what would this important proposal be?" Isabella asked softly. Dominic stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city stretching below. "In recent months, I've rediscovered who I am when I'm not trying to impress anyone or prove my power. I discovered that I like the man I am when I'm with you. Not the powerful Dominic Lancaster of the tabloids, but just Dominic, the man who gets nervous before an important conversation with the woman he loves." Isabella stood up and went to him, lightly touching his arm. "Go on." "You transformed me, Isabella. Not because you tried to change me, but because you showed me that I could choose to be different. You gave me the example of courage I needed to face my demons and rebuild my life on solid foundations. You did that yourself. I just believed you were capable." Dominic turned to her, taking her hands in his. "And that's why I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your belief in me." It was then that he knelt. Isabella felt the air escape from her lungs as he took a small blue velvet box from his pocket. The ring he revealed when he opened it was perfect, a classic solitaire diamond, elegant without being ostentatious, clearly chosen by someone who knew her deeply. "Isabella Santos," his voice trembled slightly. "Will you marry me? Not my money or my status, but me, the imperfect man who makes mistakes, who has a dark past, but who loves you more than anything in this world." Tears that she didn't try to hide streamed down Isabella's face. "Dominic, I know it's early. I know you're building your career and that you have every reason to want your independence. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm asking us to build something together, as partners, as equals." "Stand up," she said softly. Dominic obeyed. Confusion and apprehension mixed on his face. "Is that a no?" "This is a stop kneeling to me." Isabella smiled through the tears. "We are equals, remember? Partners. And partners make important decisions looking into each other's eyes." So? "So yes. Yes, I want to marry you. the man who sacrificed himself to protect me, the man who had the courage to change when he could, have continued being who he always was. The man who loves me not despite my strength but because of it. Dominic slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that contained all the months of separation, all the unspoken truths, all the promises of a shared future. When they separated, both were breathless. "There's one condition," Isabella said, still in his arms. "Anyone. When we get married, it won't be a corporate merger. It won't be a social event to impress anyone. It will be our celebration. Simple, genuine, focused on what really matters. Which is that two people who met in the debris of a Persian sculpture discovered that sometimes breaking something beautiful is just the first step in building something even more beautiful." Dominic laughed, that free and genuine sound she had learned to love. "You know this is going to be the best wedding story anyone has ever heard." "Our story," Isabella corrected, "and I can't wait to see how it continues." They stood embraced by the window, watching New York move below, a city of millions of people, each with their own story, their own dreams and fears. But in that moment, there were only the two of them. A man who had learned that true power came from vulnerability, and a woman who had discovered that being seen was much better than being invisible. 6 months later, they married in a small, intimate ceremony in the garden of the house they bought together, a property that managed to be luxurious without being ostentatious, elegant without being cold. The guests were few, true friends, colleagues who had become family, and the people who had supported both in their journey of self-discovery. And when Dominic Lancaster and Isabella Santos kissed as husband and wife under a starry New York sky, both knew they had found something that no money in the world could buy, a love that had transformed them into better versions of themselves and the promise of a lifetime to continue growing together. Some stories begin with casual encounters. Theirs began with an accident that revealed itself to be no accident at all, but destiny finally putting two lost souls in each other's path. And they lived, not happily ever after,